Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow good stories. Hearing the call, Alice panicked. While that man was still wrapped around her body, Chloe was angry, her voice trembling. What on earth are you? Alice pushed that man away. Go. They'll kill you if they catch you. That man replied, I'd happily die right here. Please, Eddie, Alice begged him. Chloe panicked when she heard the name Eddie. She suddenly remembered that Alice once told her about this name, an encounter with a bohemian at the village festival the other day. He was such an intriguing fellow. He said his name is Eddie. I do hope to see him again. Chloe remembers that day. She was panicked when she realized they had been seeing each other all that time. The Grand Duke placed his hand on Chloe's shoulder to reassure her. Are you all right? Chloe embarrassedly apologized to him. After that man left, Alice hurriedly ran in front of Chloe. Chloe, Eddie happened to appear out of nowhere. I took by surprise. Stop talking. Alice, Chloe interrupted her sister with a voice full of anger. But would you excuse me for a moment while I sent my sister away? Chloe looked up and asked the Grand Duke. As you wish, said the Grand Duke. Chloe then ordered Alice to return to the carriage immediately. After Alice also left, the new Grand Duke spoke. Lord Verdier's second daughter will be setting tongues wagging yet again. Chloe suddenly frowned in fear. He continued to say, she's got quite a talent for causing a scandal every time she appears in high society. Chloe's whole body trembled. I beg you, please. Please do not speak of this to anyone. He asked her again. And why shouldn't I? I am sure you are well aware that no one would find fault with me if I were to punish your family for the crime of bringing an unauthorized person onto my estate. No matter what he said, Chloe trembled. She is really scared. Disaster will fall us if I am unable to convince him to keep quiet. I have to persuade him somehow. Thinking of this, she panicked and quickly knelt down and begged the Grand Duke. All of this is my fault for failing to keep an eye on my foolish sister. I beseech you, punish me instead. I am on my knees begging you. The Grand Duke bent down. And if I refuse, what will you do then? Chloe looked at him confused. Her heart was pounding. Think, Chloe. There's no time to lose. Think of something, for father and Alice's sake. Suddenly, Chloe spoke up. House, this is a family that values honor above all else. You are its sole heir, a celebrated commander who led your army to great victory during the war, and the first to ever be conferred an Order of Merit by the royal family. The Grand Duke interrupted her. Do continue. Chloe continued, you once said, I shall do everything in my power to lead my soldiers to victory. You will bring glory to those who fought alongside you in the war. It was during that time that the Lord of Remote Castle opened his gates to your soldiers and showed them hospitality. Although he himself did not take up arms, his support must have proven invaluable. Suddenly, the Grand Duke laughed loudly at Chloe's words. In other words, you want me to repay that debt, for that is the way of the honorable house this? Chloe replied, I only ask that you show our humble family a little generosity for our service. The Grand Duke replied, have I not already repaid the favor by inviting you and your sister to a gathering of the most prestigious noble families in the kingdom? It is your sister you should be blamed for trampling all over this opportunity. Now, do you have anything left to say? After speaking, he tried to stand up, but Chloe grabbed his leg and begged, Your Grace. He replied contemptuously, What do you think you are doing? Chloe despaired. Just this once, if you could forgive us just this once, I will do whatever you wish. With a truly trembling voice, Chloe continued, I will never forget your kindness. The Grand Duke sighed. Chloe, why are you doing this? As he spoke, he lifted her chin. The noblewoman who had her head held high. Where has she gone? Clinging to my feet and wailing that you'll do anything for me doesn't become you. Hearing this, Chloe's heart beat fast and was filled with panic. Fireworks began to bloom in the sky. The Grand Duke's words mixed with the sound of fireworks. The issue of your sister's marriage must be the reason you are begging me on your knees. Your family's only hope for turning their fortune around is for either you or her to marry into wealth. A marriage of convenience, if you will. Your life, Lady Chloe. Do you not care what comes of it? Chloe replied, No, I don't. To me, happiness is seeing the people I love being well cared for. And are you willing to do anything to achieve that? The Grand Duke spoke closer to Chloe. Chloe replied, If it is within my abilities. Immediately, the Grand Duke grimaced angrily. Interesting. Then I shall have to think about what you might be able to do for me in return. As he spoke, he used his hand to touch her cheek. Now, go back to the Verdier estate at once. Full of sadness, Chloe replied, I would like that. The Grand Duke mentioned the Crown Prince. but His Highness requested to be introduced to Alice from this moment on. If you behave in such a way that attracts the attention of Johannes or any other man in the empire, I shall kill both of you and your family with my own two hands. He warned Chloe in a dangerous tone. These are the limits of generosity, and one more thing. I suggest you refrain from entering this or with men you do not trust. This garden is a place requited by lovers. Speaking of which, the distance between the two is really close. Chloe blushed slightly and looked at the Grand Duke. He added, who come to satisfy their unbridled passions. Unless you are hoping rumors will spread about a scandal between the two of us, that is. Chloe was the only one left in the flower garden. In front of her was a scene of blazing fireworks, but her heart was full of chaos. Her hands shook to control her panic. What a despicable man, she thought to herself. In the blink of an eye, 3 months later, Chloe wrote a letter to the Grand Duke, to His Grace Duke Damien Ernst von Thys. My Lord Duke, I hope this letter finds you well. There is talk of marriage between my sister Alice and the gentleman she met at the ball that day. Our family is overjoyed, for he is a man of the highest moral character. I am well aware that this is the fruit of your generosity. After much disturbing as to how I might repay your kindness, it has come to the point where, writing here, she thought, that seems a bit excessive. Gilles called her name. I've brought you some refreshments. Thank you. Gilles, Chloe replied. Chloe asked Gilles, how is Alice? Gilles replied, she went out briefly in the morning but hasn't left her room since. She has been disappointed all food, complaining of stomach discomfort. I see. Chloe replied, she didn't go meet with that Bowman again, did she? Gilles replied, I don't believe so. Lady Alice seems to have matured as of late. You're right. Chloe says, she should know better. What with all the talk of engagement to Count Cormier? The Count is a good man, and he is a well-respected member of society. I know Alice will be happy with him. After all, he's a much better match than that itinerant man. Lady Chloe, if Lady Alice gets married, I fear that you'll become rather lonely. Chloe smiled and replied, are you worried for me? Gilles, I know it isn't my place. How could that ever happen? I'll still have you. Thank you for your concern, Gilles. Chloe replied. Chloe's answer made Gilles embarrassed. Chloe suggested, since you're here, why don't you take a look at this letter for me? I'm writing to thank Duke Thys for inviting us to the ball, but I feel that it's still missing something. He's so ill-humored that he'll likely find fault with it no matter what I write. Gilles looked at the letters and thought thoughtfully, if he's so ill-humored, he'll probably be even more disapproving of any delay in receiving these left dash dot in the middle of speaking. Chloe's father opened the door and rushed in. Chloe, my dear. Chloe was surprised. Father? Her father walked in with a happy look on his face. Get ready. Quickly, now. Duke Thys is coming to hunt on our estate. Chloe was surprised. What do you? Her father continued. As you know, our forests are full of wild animals. Chloe thought, why would he come all the way out here to go hunting? Her father added, I only received the message a short while ago. It seems he will be arriving sooner than expected. With his passion for hunting, I suppose it isn't a surprise that he's racing to get here. Chloe and her father went to the lobby to welcome the Duke. Greetings, Your Grace. It is an honor to have you here. I hope the blistering heat hasn't made you too weary. Have you been well? You have far fewer servants than before? Viscount Verdier replied, yes. Well, we're had several years of rather poor harvest. Unfortunately, Chloe interrupted, the castle is still in disarray. We received news of your arrival quite late. Nevertheless, we shall do our utmost to make your stay comfortable. Yes, the Grand Duke replied with a happy expression. I shall hold you to your word. I do. Noble who does not know how to be gracious host, does not deserve her title. At Viscount Verdier's mansion, the Grand Duke and the Viscount's family sat down for a sumptuous meal. The Viscount opened his mouth. I do hope you'll forgive us, Your Grace. It seems my youngest daughter Alice is feeling indisposed. The Grand Duke smiled and replied, I hope it is nothing serious. Thank you for your concern, the Viscount replied, and we are much obliged for this splendid meal you have prepared for us. My apologies. It is us who should be entertaining you. D is my pleasure, the Grand Duke replied. But what a pity. It seems this course is not to Lady Chloe's liking. Chloe was startled when she heard the Grand Duke mention her name. Without looking at him, she replied lightly that she was a bit tired due to the hot weather, which affected her appetite. The Grand Duke replied, it would do you some good to increase your resilience to the outdoors. Viscount Verdier happily broke this awkward atmosphere. It seems being in your grace's presence has made my daughter nervous. Her love for the forest is such that it isn't uncommon for her to fall asleep whilst reading beneath the trees. Chloe was startled when her father mentioned the forest in front of the Grand Duke. He looked surprised. So what? So she must be quite familiar with the directions of this forest. Still showing off his daughter, the Viscount still did not pay attention to the implication in that sentence, that she is. It would be no exaggeration to describe the forest leading to the mountains as her very own private garden. I recollect a time in which she feels horribly ill after returning from an outing. Yet, even after suffering so, she never stopped frequenting the woods. The Grand Duke smiled as if looking at Chloe and asked, "You don't say?" The Viscount still innocently added, "Now that I recall, it was exactly around the time you and your soldiers were staying with us in Castle Verdier." Gilles came to pour water for Chloe and saw that her face was not very good, so he asked. The two of them looked quite close. Chloe thanked Gilles for asking, but she was fine, thanks for the glass of water. This scene caught the eyes of the Grand Duke. He looked uncomfortable. With a dangerous look in his eyes, the Grand Duke made a proposal. If she likes the forest so much, I would like to make an offer that she will show me the way in tomorrow's hunt. Chloe was surprised by the Grand Duke's sudden proposal. Viscount Verdier is worried that Chloe's condition will hinder the hunt. If the Grand Duke wanted someone to show the way, he would find someone else. Don't wait to hear the Viscount's answer. Grand Duke this turned to Chloe to ask her opinion. Chloe sweated and didn't know how to answer. Looking at it, she knew she didn't want to go at all. But anyway, he already knew about it. Chloe replied that if you agree to let my servant lead the horse, then I will be happy to follow you. The Grand Duke refused bluntly. No, you, my lady, shall be riding with me on my horse. As you can imagine, I am not accustomed to following behind others. In the blink of an eye, tomorrow arrived. Chloe, wearing hunting clothes, stood looking at the Grand Duke sitting on his horse, waving for her to come. Chloe was really worried about whether it was safe or not. She used to leisurely walk around on horseback, but had never gone hunting. Furthermore, how could she trust this man? The Grand Duke urged Chloe. Quickly now, she turned to give her cane to Gilles. The guy asked her with concern, "Will you be all right, my lady?" The Grand Duke was not very pleased when he saw this scene. The two of them sat on the horse, and the Grand Duke asked, "It seems you and that attendant of yours are on rather familiar terms." She asked if he was talking about Gilles. The Grand Duke replied, "Yes, that servant of yours who was in the stables." Chloe explains that Gilles has worked for her family since he was a child. When the other servants left due to lack of pay, he still chose to stay with her family. Chloe continued to speak, unaware that the Grand Duke was frowning behind her. To Chloe's family, Gilles was more than just a worker. Hearing this, the Grand Duke urged his horse to run faster, making Chloe panic and scream, "Your Grace." Direction, Lady Chloe. The Grand Duke responded to her scream. Clearly he was indifferent. The Grand Duke continued asking, "Which way is it? Left or right?" Chloe was so scared that she couldn't even answer in sentences. After urging her, she also shouted, "Left. We must go left." The Grand Duke's hunting dogs quickly ran to pounce on the deer in front. Later, Chloe was so scared that she was sweating. "Looks like they've caught a deer and a rather large one at that," said the Grand Duke. Full of mystery, he leaned close to Chloe's ear and whispered, "So you really do know the lay of the forest?" Chloe was startled by the Grand Duke's sudden action. She thought he did it to torment her. Chloe's hand holding the reins was shaking as if the Grand Duke was the devil incarnate. During this time, this covered her eyes with her hand, signaling calmly, "Breath, Lady Chloe. There. It's all over. Everything will be all right." It seemed the Duke enjoyed the feeling of her relying on him. Night has fallen on Viscount Verdier's castle. The Duke's family was having dinner, and Chloe said she would call the doctor as soon as it was morning. Viscount Verdier didn't understand why he had to call a doctor. Chloe explained that the Duke had been injured while dining. Here, Alice is still quietly enjoying dinner. The Grand Duke was attacked by a wild animal, so his wound needed to be examined. Chloe's father looked worriedly at the Grand Duke and asked if the wound was serious. The Grand Duke replied that he was bitten while walking because hunting on horseback was not thrilling enough. The Viscount offered to let Chloe stitch the Grand Duke's wound as long as the wound was not too deep. Hearing this, Alice slammed her fork into the plate and continued to say to her father, "It's unfortunate, but my house doesn't have anesthetic, so you have to endure the pain." She looked at the Grand Duke and said, Chloe still felt like she should call a doctor for the Grand Duke, but it seemed like Alice wanted the Grand Duke to suffer a bit. She said it was summer, so there were thousands of villagers falling sick from food poisoning every day. But here, and there was only one doctor to take care of all of them. It turns out this is why Chloe studied basic medical care. The Grand Duke wiped his mouth and smiled, and replied, I certainly do not wish to take away a valuable resource from the people of your domain. I am but a guest here. After all, would you mid taking a look after dinner, Lady Chloe? He pretended to smile and asked Chloe for her opinion. But Chloe still thought it would be wiser to send in an expert. Her father continued, She is right. Allow me to send for him right awe. Before he could finish speaking, the Grand Duke interrupted. Back when my soldiers were staying at your castle several years ago, the sigh of Lady Chloe tending to their injuries left impression on me. I have faith your daughter will do an excellent job. Full of pride in his daughter, Viscount Verdier happily asked the Grand Duke if he still remembered that story. The Grand Duke replied, Of course, I haven't forgotten a since detail about the events that transpired on these grounds. As he spoke, he glanced at Chloe. Chloe looked at the Grand Duke in confusion, not expecting him to still remember those things. After dinner, Chloe went to the Grand Duke's room to bandage him. You look like a prisoner being led to the gallows, the Grand Duke teased. He thinks that with a simple request, she doesn't need to be so scared. As he spoke, he didn't look at her but was still intently reading the book. Chloe didn't pay attention to those words. Please show me your wound, she said. Why do you look for yourself? He responded to her indifferently. Chloe sat down on the chair with the medicine tray and told him to roll up his sleeve so she could check. The Grand Duke said, I am sure you are capable of that much, Chloe. He wanted her to lift his sleeve herself, but Chloe thinks that's not something an unmarried woman should do. The Grand Duke laughed at Chloe's answer and said, How old-fashioned of you. Well, I suppose you are right, not making it difficult for her anymore. He took off his shirt. When there was no need to do so, Chloe panicked. Seeing her staring at him, he teased, I know it might be hard to resist, but I think it'd be better if you didn't stare so. Chloe's face was as red as a tomato. She never told him to take off his shirt. Why was he so rude? After a while to regain her composure, she also began to give first aid to the Grand Duke's arm. While cleaning the wound, Chloe reminded the Grand Duke that his teeth might hurt a bit. The Grand Duke teased her again, saying, I want you to make me suffer as much as possible. Seeing that she did not answer, he immediately asked, You said your private tutor was a physician? Yes, Chloe replied. The Grand Duke replied, That must be useful in situations like this. Chloe gently stitched the Grand Duke's wound. Meanwhile, Chloe also mentioned that she had learned a bit of medicine from him, but it was a completely different pursuit from the one being used now. The Duke asked, And what might that be? Chloe replied carefree, Embroidery. The Grand Duke laughed. This is the first time in my life I've considered embroidery as a useful pastime. He added, All right, do tell, does your sister still hold secret rendezvous after dark? Chloe did not answer that question. She just replied, Please refrain from speaking. You should be as still as possible. Answer my question, the Grand Duke reminded her. Chloe had to answer him. Since that night, she has seen the error of her ways, and thanks to your grace, there is talk of marriage between her and Count Cormier. Chloe was very grateful for that. The Duke replied to Chloe with a sarcastic voice, Had I known my silence would be repaid with 3 months of silence from you, I would never have done you that favor. After speaking, he moved his face close to Chloe, making her heart pound. You are much too close, your grace. Chloe said, Answer me, the Duke emphasized. You can tell he's really upset because Chloe hasn't responded once in the past 3 months. Chloe's sweat dropped, explaining she had also written a lot of letters. The Grand Duke said he had never received one. Chloe added it was because she couldn't send them herself. The closer he got, the more the Grand Duke realized that Chloe was lying. Chloe used both hands to push him away while her heart felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. She begged the Duke not to come any closer, but the Grand Duke didn't pay any attention to that. He repeated once more, asking Chloe to speak truth. Gathering all her courage, Chloe pushed the Grand Duke away and shouted, It's because you ignore me. Duke this was really surprised by Chloe's answer. Blushing, not daring to look directly at the Duke, Chloe added, I am well aware how unbearably repulsive you find me. That is why I hesitated so. I was unsure of how I should try to repay you. My apologies. Chloe hesitantly apologized and then tried to stand up to leave this awkward situation. When she stood up, Chloe tripped over the Grand Duke's shirt, so she slipped and was about to fall when Duke this quickly caught her and threw her onto the bed. Chloe opened her eyes wide in panic and looked at the Grand Duke. She noticed that the wound she had just stitched had torn open. The Grand Duke said, "Chloe can get stitches again or not." Chloe is worried. She asked him, "What on earth is it that you want from me?" In response to that question, the Grand Duke stroked her hair and replied, "I think you already know the answer to that." Then he kissed her hair. Chloe replied, "I am only here to treat you per my father's instructions." After speaking, she turned away without looking into the Duke's eyes. "Oh, Lady Chloe." The Grand Duke looked at her with an innocent look. "Do you truly believe that is all he wanted?" Chloe suddenly realized that this conversation was exactly like 3 years ago. He said the same thing. Chloe replied, "I understand why you doubt people's intentions, for you have learned not to trust others while on the battlefield. However, to think every woman in the kingdom is desperate to marry you is a bit of an egotistical delusion, is it not?" Duke this was once again surprised by Chloe's answer, and then he burst out laughing. Chloe didn't understand why he was laughing. Meanwhile, the Duke kept laughing. Chloe thinks he's probably really out of his mind. Duke this finally stopped laughing and replied, "Fine, shall we put your theory to the test?" Lifting her up, the Duke told Chloe she could go because her work was done. Leaving the Duke's room, Chloe felt so relieved. Chloe went back to her room. In front of her dressing table was a pair of gloves. She thought, why would she waste time thinking about how to thank such a terrible man? Chloe thought she was foolish to think of giving the Grand Duke these gloves. Thinking back to what the Grand Duke had just done made her angry because he didn't use a bigger needle. Trying to suppress her dislike for that man, Chloe was still grateful that, thanks to him, Alice was able to meet Count Cormier. Opening the window to cool down and standing by the window, Chloe was still worried about Alice. She thought that once Alice got married and things gradually became stable, everything would be okay. One morning, a shocking incident caused chaos in the Viscount's castle. Alice panicked and asked Chloe if the Grand Duke was injured in the head instead of injuring his hand, right? Viscount Verdier asked the Duke if what he had just heard was true. Duke this still firmly replied that he wanted to propose to the Viscount's daughter, Lady Alice Verdier. The Viscount smiled wryly and said that as the Duke saw, Alice was betrothed to Count Cormier. The Grand Duke calmly sipped his tea and said that fact did not change his desire to marry Alice. Moreover, he added another sentence. "It seems you do not find me adequate, Lord Verdier, as you keep making unnecessary remarks." The atmosphere suddenly became very strange. The Viscount quickly explained that he didn't mean that, but no matter what he did, he had to respect his daughter's wishes. The Grand Duke also agreed with that thought. He offered to give the Viscount 3 days to consider the proposal. During that time, the Grand Duke will stay at his mansion next to the castle. Before leaving, the Grand Duke also emphasized that he hoped the Viscount would consider this matter carefully. After hearing the Duke's proposal, Alice angrily went into the room and shouted that she never wanted to become a duchess, breaking everything and then lying down crying. Even though she clearly knew this was her family's opportunity, she didn't want that. Chloe gently comforted her sister. Chloe also didn't understand why the Duke proposed to Alice, unless she remembered the conversation the night before with the Duke. Patting Alice, Chloe consoled her that she didn't have to go through this if she didn't want to. Chloe said she would talk to her father about this again. Alice looked at her sister with tears in her eyes, then hugged Chloe. Alice worries that what if something goes wrong and she can't get married? What will happen to her family now that the Duke has proposed? This will definitely mark the end of things for Count Cormier. Speaking of this, Alice was really scared. She was afraid that if she refused the Duke, he would do bad things to her family. Chloe comforted her sister. "Don't cry, my sister. Everything will be fine. You will receive new proposals as time passes. Don't worry. Just bear with it a little longer." Suddenly, Alice confessed to her sister, I am in love with Eddie." Chloe looked at her sister worriedly. Alice continued, "I am carrying his child." Chloe was shocked when she heard this. Alice sobbed and asked her sister what to do.